The Banshee in the Bog. Irish folklore is littered with mysterious and terrifying creatures, the kind that sound so unbelievable, but that people speak of with such conviction that you can't help but wonder if there must be a layer of truth buried in there. Old people in particular still hold a belief of the fairy folk and lore of ancient Ireland. Before she passed away, my grandmother would have sat us down in her cottage and filled its walls with the tales of all kinds of spirits, from silently watchful black hounds to the kelpie, a water horse that would seduce you into riding it before darting into the depths of a lake, or lough, and galloping into the murky depths. When my parents would collect us, Mom would scowl when she found out about the ghost story session, knowing that neither my brother nor I would be getting much sleep that night. Nevertheless, I cherish these fireplace memories as they take me back to a simpler time when the dark winter evenings would be filled with life in the form of Granny's littling aged voice. My favorite of these creatures, or at least favorite I suppose, given the endless amount of nightmares it implanted into my mind as a child, was the Banshee, a spirit tied to particular families. Legend has it that she appeared in different forms, but tends to favor that of either a beautiful but distraught woman or of a hunched, ailing, older washerwoman, if it appeared by sight at all. If it is even more distinct, you see, by its unearthly cry. Its wails and weeps fill a room, or would be audible for miles away across the countryside. The person who crosses path with the Banshee, or its cry, should quickly alert the family, as this is a signal that someone from the family has died, or is set to die. Yes, the Banshee is an omen of death. As I grew older, I became cynical to the tales my grandmother had spouted, including that of the Banshee. I moved to the city for university at 18, and in immersing myself with the life in the modern world, the ways of country life seemed to evaporate. A small-scale reflection of the increasingly modernizing world, I guess. Sad when you think about it, isn't it? That was until one particular summer. My parents had recently downsized to a small cottage deep in the barren Irish West, where the roar of city life was inaudible. I stayed with my parents for the month of July and spent long, languid days roaming the nearby fields and looking out for signs of wildlife, such as foxes that roamed late at dusk, or the bats that flew low along the lanes, which were laden with sprawling plant life. My story begins, I suppose, in the second week of my stay. I had taken to going for twilight walks, making the most of our northern sun, which can see daylight lasting until close to 11 p.m. I was some miles away from the house, but could sense darkness approaching, and decided to make my way home. Nighttime in that part of the country is utterly dark, and not something you want to find yourself swallowed by. It was as I was walking back that I heard it, the most startling, biting cry. It seemed to fill the world around me, as though echoing against stone walls, even though I was surrounded by open nature. I can try to describe it by saying that it was on one hand the sound of a woman in sharp pain, but equally that of a grieving mother sobbing the loss of her child. I was momentarily horrified. In one moment, it seemed that all of my cynicism was laid to rest, and that I should run home without question. What sort of horrific creature was capable of producing a sound like this? However, I then tried to apply logic. After all, can't foxes make the most spine-tingling noises when they're distressed? Or even in heat? There had been a purely natural explanation to this, in spite of indisputably unnatural it sounded. Whatever it was, I didn't want to stick around and find out. I would run home, I decided, and alert my parents. just in case someone was genuinely in distress or harm. I began to pick up the pace, breaking into a jog, but something in the peripheries of my vision brought me to a sharp and sudden stop. To my left was bogland, an area that I'd been warned never to walk in, as it would be all too easy to sink into the wet ground and become stuck, or even suffocated. It was shocking to me, therefore, that in the midst of this bogland stood a woman, long silvery blonde hair twisting in the evening breeze. The relative distance and encroaching darkness made it hard to make her out entirely, but she looked to be in her mid-20s, my age, and her face was contorted in what looked like either pain or horror. It was from her mouth. I realized that the bone-chilling screams were emerging. Initially, I was stunned. This was so adverse to anything I'd experienced in this part of the world so far, which seemed so devoid of alarm or drama or consequence. But I shook myself then and called out to the woman as loudly as I could. "Hello, what's wrong? Are you stuck?" She seemed to register me, small eyes turning in my direction, but there was no response, aside from the continuous screech which now pounded in my head. "Hello, I'm going to try to get help. I'll be back as soon as I can." With that, I ripped my eyes from the woman and darted back to the house as quickly as I could. I was around a mile away, but phone signal was limited in that part of the country, and I knew I needed to get home in order to do something to assist the woman. I would have been at risk to my own life to have walked across the bogland towards her. When I got home, my parents' warm faces quickly dropped to the looks of alarm upon registering me. "What is it? You look as if you've seen a ghost." I quickly filled them in on what I'd seen, and they sprung into action, grabbing the phone and alerting the local Garda, our police force. In the meantime, my father and I leapt into the car to make our way back to the spot, whilst my mother waited for Garda to arrive. By car, we were there within minutes, and I quickly directed my father to where I had seen the incident. I pride myself on my sense of direction, and the lane is fairly straightforward, so I was utterly bemused when I realized that there was no woman in sight, nor sound within earshot, bar the standard noises of country evening. We scanned the area, but still nothing. When my mother arrived with the constable, he questioned me about where I had seen the woman, and raised his eyebrow when I said she was no longer there. There's no way she could have submerged in that space of time. You said she was standing fully upright when you saw her here, right?" "That's right. She was a bit of a distance away, but it didn't look like her legs were submerged at all. It was screaming that made me run for help." He nodded. "Okay, son, thank you. Could you very clearly tell me once again exactly what you saw? Try not to miss anything out." I did so, relaying the story to him again, and trying to interpret his facial reactions as I did so. He remained quite neutral, writing my account onto his notepad. When I finished, he paused before speaking slowly. "Right. I'm going to say first that given how few people live around here, I myself can't say I know anyone fitting that description. I like to think that I know each and every one around these parts. However, I'm going to file a report and investigate this further. It might be that she got herself free and walked off again." Here he stopped and bit the end of his pen, looking thoughtful before continuing with some visible discomfort. "I want to thank you for alerting me about this. I just want to say, before I set off, I've heard of cases like this in the past. Figures, women, appearing around the countryside and alarming a passerby with their cry. Again, officially, I'm going to handle this as I'd handle any other case. But I want you to do me a favor. Check in with your family this evening and see how they're doing. It might sound odd, but can you do that for me?" Dad looked perplexed at this and seemed like he was going to ask further questions. But Mom interjected, nodding. "Yes, officer. I think I understand you. We'll do that." With that, we drove home. The darkness of the land around us was impenetrable. Aside from the light of the car's full beam, it was a moonless night. We didn't need to contact our family members that evening. Well, we got in contact, but what I mean to say is, they reached out to us first. My mother's brother-in-law had sent her a message when we'd been out. The message wasn't long. It simply read, "Hi Bridget, tried to contact you, but no reply. Please call." When Mom got through, she was distraught to find out her sister had passed away that evening. It had been a sudden medical event that nobody had predicted. Aunt Sarah had been living with her husband and family in the USA for years. We saw her biannually most years, but the death shook us up nevertheless. In the days that followed, we sprung into action, assisting with funeral arrangements in whatever way we could, booking flights to Boston. I didn't voice it to my parents, not wanting to upset them further, but I couldn't help but consider the incident with the woman in the bog, and what the officer had said to us. My logical mind tried its best to protest, but my memory kept tiptoeing back to the stories my grandfather had told me years ago, particularly those of the Banshee. Was it possible that it could have been the explanation? Was the woman in the field trying to alert me? To warn me about the impending death of my aunt? It took 2 years for me to bring this up to my mother. I was once again visiting home, and we were drinking tea in the garden. It was yet another summer evening at twilight, and I was taken back to that night by the bog. I voiced my memories to Mom, and asked her if she remembered what the constable had said. She gazed into her cup of tea and sighed and looked up at me slowly. "Yes, son, I remember." "Do you recall me telling him that I thought I might understand?" "Yes, Mom, I do. Your dad was ready to question him. Well, this might sound crazy to you, but I did understand. You see, about 3 years before that, similar had happened." I took an intake of breath, but she must have seen my eyes widen. "Oh no, I didn't see a woman, if that's what you think. But I did hear a cry from within the walls of our old home on the evening your granny passed away, as though someone was screaming deep inside the house. Of course, the difference is that we were prepared that time. We knew it was only a matter of days or hours. But I did hear the cry. It terrified me at the time. It's part of the reason we sold up and moved to this cottage. I was dumbstruck. When I finally found my voice, I told her I hoped that she hadn't come to hate the new house too, following what I had seen the last 2 years before. "Oh no," she responded. "No, I actually think it's helped me deal with the first occasion, believe it or not. You see, I think maybe it's not a bad thing. She was distressed, you say, when you saw her there. The woman in the bog, I mean. Well, perhaps she was just sad as we were. Perhaps she's just part of the family. I do wonder if anyone has seen or heard her in the past. Your grandmother, well, you remember her stories. I used to grimace when I came home to you and your brothers shuddering on the sofa. I still stand by that." She smiled wistfully at me and she said this, and I was transported back to the corner of the old sofa. But it could be that she knew there was some truth behind what she was saying. Perhaps your grandmother, my mother, had seen her sad friend too. With that, she finished her tea, lifted both cups from the table, and walked to the sink, leaving me filled with thoughts, nostalgia, and an overwhelming sense of closeness to my own family, culture, and land that I hadn't felt before. I've had many experiences with ghosts. I've had countless experiences with ghosts for the last 10 years. I think I brought it into my life by constantly using a Ouija board when I was in high school. Here are a couple. When I was in high school, I used to clean my uncle's house for money when he was away at work. I always thought the house was really creepy and weird things would happen. My dog would get locked in a room. I live in the north, where it's pitch black in the winter months most of the time. I was finishing up cleaning for the day and I was vacuuming, and I looked up at the window in front of me and I saw a dark figure behind me in the hallway. The window was kind of like a mirror because it was so dark outside. As soon as I squinted to try to see more clearly what it was, all the lights and power in the house shut off. The vacuum shut off, the lights. It was pitch black and silent. I ran outside down the street and didn't look back. 2. My most recent experience is this. 6 months to a year ago, I started experiencing strange things happening in my apartment. Someone would knock on the door and I would open it, and nobody was there. One night, my husband was out of town, and I was sleeping in the apartment alone. I keep our bedroom door closed because our dogs sleep with us, and I don't want him roaming the apartment at night. I heard some weird noises in the living room, but I tried not to think much of it because I was scared and I just wanted to try to fall asleep. Then I heard a light knock on my bedroom door. This freaked me out, but I didn't do anything and just ended up going to sleep. As I said above, I've had countless experiences with ghosts, so maybe I'm just used to it. In the morning, I went to the living room, and in the middle of the room on the ground was a perfectly straight, fake vine laid out on the floor. For decor, I had vines wrapped around the curtain rods. I have no explanation other than a ghost for this, because to take those down, you need to go on a ladder and unravel these vines. I think I have an attachment. When I was around 10, I'd see a door get pulled open after trying to open it multiple times, where I saw a girl dead, hanging by a noose, dripping blood. The door slammed. I went back to see what was really there, and there was nothing there. There were 2 other people with me also, who saw it. I'm an insomniac. When I was around 8, I had one of the deepest sleeps ever, but got woken out of it by some sort of cold wind. It was around 3 a.m. at the time. I lived in a country where it never got colder than like 15 degrees. Anyway, I woke up suddenly and I saw something in the corner. It was a shadowy figure. When I think about it now, it was very familiar and looked a lot like what I look like now. Although it didn't have many features, the body and hair type, and all reminds me of myself now. The figure came up to me and I thought it was my mom, so I said hello. It lifted its hand and it crawled onto the bed. Its face formed a sort of almost transparent mouth, and it opened its mouth then disappeared into me. I felt extremely cold, then a warmth, then nothing, and I decided I was imagining things. When I woke up, there was water on my floor, even though I had no bottles of water in my room, and it was in the middle of a drought, so it couldn't be flooding. I'm mentally ill. I think I have bipolar disorder, so I get scared. A lot of this stuff is paranoia or mania, or stuff I imagine. But I've heard humming and singing multiple times when I've been completely alone. I have many periods of time where I only dream about dead people, or have the exact same dream again and again, or see visions in my head of the dream even when I'm awake. I'm a huge empath for people who are alive, and generally, there's been multiple times where I've been near places where people have died and felt really overwhelmed and cried and stuff before I even knew it was anything to do with the dead. Also, when I watch or hear about paranormal things sometimes, I start to feel dizzy, extremely angry or sad. But lately, I've been having random chest pain, back pain. I've been to the doctor, but there's nothing that could cause that. I've also been feeling as if something is coming for me or warning me. I feel like I'm kind of going crazy. I played with a child's ghost in the children's hospital ER when I was 3. When I was 3 or 4, I fell pretty violently down the staircase in my family's old Massachusetts Victorian home, and my parents took me to the Bay State Children's Hospital, one town over in Springfield, Massachusetts. I just had a busted lip from hitting the wall on the way down because it was one of those main staircases that turns, and then continues downward. But my parents were concerned that I hit my head. So despite my crying and protesting at the idea of going to the doctors, they took me. I remember being absolutely terrified at the idea of possibly needing stitches in my lip, so I cried the whole way there. The one good thing I remember about this place was the big playroom they had in the regular children's hospital unit. However, the children's ER only had a few of those bead toys on a wooden box with the squiggly plastic bits to slide the beads on. I don't know what they're called. I sat down in front of the toy and started sliding the blocks and beads around the loop in turns of the plastic. Then a boy started talking to me. When I looked up, he was on the other side of the toy. I remember being taken back because I'd never seen him before. The most gore I'd ever seen was when my parents were scrambling for the remote while we were watching The Simpsons and Itchy and Scratchy came on. The side of the boy's head was cracked completely open, and as I took in his injury, a strange scent hit me. Sort of a sickly sweet smell, but it was barely there, if that makes sense. I was a very anxious child, so I tried my hardest to hide my uneasiness, smiled at him, and continued to play. I remember he asked me, "What happened to you?" And I answered that I fell down the stairs. Then I asked him, "How did you get your boo-boo?" Gesturing towards my own head, he answered simply that he fell and we kept playing. At the time, I thought he was a boy I knew from school, as he looked slightly similar, minus the cracked open head, so I felt comfortable with him after a few minutes. We chatted about how we were both afraid of being at the doctor's and of being hurt from whatever the treatment would be. That's pretty much the end of the memory. I got medicine on my lip, and they checked my head to make sure I wasn't hit during the fall. Then a month or so later, there was a fire drill at my school. We were all lined up in the parking lot, and I spotted the kid who I thought was the one in the ER with me. But to my surprise, his head was perfectly intact. Not even stitches or a scar. His hair growth was also completely uninterrupted. And I knew the doctors would shave down the hair to treat the wound. In that moment, I basically just shrugged it off as my mistake. It wasn't that kid, so finally, a few years ago, when I was 20, I brought this memory up to my parents, and they had no idea what I was talking about. They remembered my fall and the trip to the ER, me playing in the waiting room, but not a boy with a cracked open head playing with me. They said if this head was as I described it would be, he would not be in the waiting room just hanging out. When they said that, my adult brain processed the memory again, and I was basically like, oh yeah, what the fuck? Then I remembered the smell that emanated from him as we talked and played. I kept trying to place the smell of infection, or maybe just dried out inside of his wound. But then I remembered where I smelt that before. Just much, 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 much more strongly. When I lived in Okinawa, Japan, as a preteen, there were a ton of stray cats everywhere. And one day, I went on a walk with my class at my international school. It was basically a rural Japanese neighborhood with a lot of farms around. As we walked up this one hill, the boy leading us started gagging and groaning. And the rest of us just laughed because we thought he was either messing around or just being dramatic. But then the stench hit us. I'd never smelled death so strongly like that before, and my eyes literally watered. We hesitantly made our way to the top of the hill in search of the source of the odor. We noticed a red stained bag hanging off a low branch on a tree, and the boy who originally smelled it quickly dashed over to peek into the bag, and then ran back gagging. Apparently they were 3 dead, bloodied cats stuffed into a grocery bag, unceremoniously hung up. It was through the memory of that smell that I identified what the scent of the boy in the ER was. It was that tangy, sweet, rotting smell of putrefying flesh. Just like watered down, so it was almost unnoticeable. Ghost experience last night. At the end of September, my Nana, who I was extremely close with and loved very, very much, passed on. Fast forward to December, I had moved into my first apartment. We had talked many times about moving, and she was excited for me to get it. Anyways, nothing unexplained or weird happened until last night. I came home from the gym around 3 p.m. I was having a rough day and was on the phone with my mom. I'd gone into my bedroom in and out several times. My bed was made and nothing was on it. Around 5 p.m.-ish, I started to wind down and got my shower. I come back into my room, sit on the edge of my bed, moisturizing. I put on my pajamas and walked to the bathroom for maybe 3 to 5 minutes, max. Mind you, I had no music on or anything. It was silent. I come back into my bedroom, and the work clothes I changed out of hours ago were sitting on my bed. I know for a fact I put them in the hamper in the closet next to my bed. I was shocked because I knew they weren't there before because I was just sitting in that exact spot. Plus, I had already put my gym clothes in the hamper after my shower, so if I did leave my work clothes out, I would have put them in the hamper as well. It was just such a weird feeling knowing that it wasn't me. I live alone, by the way. Checked everywhere for an imaginary intruder. I was just stunned. I said, hello, and if it was my Nana, that I love her, but if not, that I'm friendly and I don't mean any harm. Nothing weird the rest of the night, and I slept fine. No bumps in the night, but it was definitely a weird and unsettling feeling. First experience in a new space. I've had experiences with ghosts or similar things most of my life. In my dad's childhood home, my older sister and I would run and frantically try to flip on the light switches to the kitchen and dining room. There was a black mass that would move from the den to the dining room and vice versa. My dad had his own experiences, such as my sister, probably 2 or 3 at the time, asking who the green man was at the end of the hall. Then my mother's house, my sister could never shut her own closet door. If she did, something went crazy, throwing stuff around the closet and ripping clothes down. She kept her mattress on the ground, so it couldn't hide under her bed. This activity stopped after my grandmother passed away in the home. As a teenager, we rented an old mill house in town. I had a radio that started turning on by itself. It never did this in any other house, so I unplugged it, and it still turned one. Whatever it was liked to scare me with the radio, turning on as soon as I reached the counter or went to bed. It even did this with my friends over. One night, my friend said he was there and something over there was with you. A dark shadow was standing by the bookcase next to the couch. I jumped up to sit with her on the love seat. The large cup of tea I had set on the floor next to the couch was now pressed up against the top of the arm of the chair. When we both saw this, it crashed to the floor. We ran out of the house. I also had scratching in my closet. Recently, my family have moved into my dad's house, not a childhood home, but my dad hasn't had any experiences in this house. The other day, I woke up and went to the hall bathroom, which is tiled. My dad's bathroom is on the other side of the wall. As I walked in, it sounded like someone held some glass above their head and slammed it down into the tile next to me, as hard as they could. I felt the impact through my feet. The vibrations were strong. The shattering sound was so loud my husband heard it in the bedroom. That evening, I asked my dad if anything fell in his bathroom. The only explanation I would have for this. Nothing fell. Nothing was moved. Somehow, that seems worse than if something were there and had broke as soon as I entered the room. And no, I wasn't stomping. I don't know what to think or do. Before that happened, I was feeling uncomfortable when I would go to sleep alone, like something might peek around the corner. or something might be in the same room with me, and now the feeling's worse. Any advice or thoughts? Today, I became a believer in the paranormal. My Nan passed away 5 weeks ago. Although she'd been poorly for a long time, no one was expecting her to pass the way she did. It all happened very fast. We had a tumultuous relationship. Amongst other things, she stopped saying "I love you" back to me. I'd tried twice in the run-up to her death. The last time I spoke to her was through text. I'd decided not to bother saying "I love you" anymore, as it hurts to not hear it back. I feel immense guilt, not just saying it to her one more time. Fast forward today. I went and viewed her body, as it's her funeral Monday. Just to preface this, I've never believed in anything paranormal. I've always been very certain you die, and that's it. The woman that worked there said she'd stay with me for a couple minutes to make sure I was okay, as unfortunately there were obvious signs of decomposition. Nothing odd happened in those 2 minutes. She left, then stood next to the light above my head flickered. Oh, just weird wiring, I thought. I said "I love you" and "I miss you." It flickered again. I stood there silently crying for a couple more minutes. The lights didn't flash. Then I said, "I'm so sorry. I'm such a shitty granddaughter. I'm keeping my promise and wearing your necklace every day." The lights flickered again. That's when I started wondering if it was her trying to talk back to me. I stood there silently for a few more minutes. I asked, "Are you here with me?" The lights flickered again. Then I said, "I hope you are okay, wherever that is." More flickering lights. I stroked her hair for a couple minutes and gave her forehead a kiss, and then I said, "I'm going to leave now. I love you." The lights flickered again. It's worth mentioning that the light fitted had 4 bulbs in it, and all 4 were flickering. This was spread out over 30 minutes. Emotionally, I have no idea how to process this. Single-handedly the most bizarre experience of my life, that it was so cathartic. I was nervous going into the room as the woman who worked there warned me that she was in bad condition. But as soon as I walked in the room with her, I felt totally fine, if not warm and reassured. My 3 ghost experiences. I had my first encounter while I was at work one evening. It was a little late, and a coworker and I were staying behind to clean up after the others had left for the day, which is something we do regularly. I was going about my business and cleaning up. When we were done and heading back to the sluice, my coworker and BFF noticed I had a pretty large oil stain in the shape of a handprint on my upper back. At first, I was suspicious of my coworker, thinking that she had placed it on my back, but we later compared her hand to the hand on my back, and her hand was too small. Thinking back on it, I never felt anyone put their hand on my back while I was working. That and the stain was so visible, if someone had actually had their hand on my back, they would have needed to keep it there for a while, and while I was moving about. I find this pretty freaky. I still have no clue where it came from or how it got there. My second and most recent encounter happened 2 days ago. The weather was pretty bad and the power ended up going out, halting production. The foreman and assistant foreman told us to go wait in the sluice, but it got a bit crowded, so we eventually shuffled into the cafeteria. My best friend and I were made to go clean up like usual, but since it was almost pitch black, we couldn't see shit and thus only finished off all the machines the best we could. We got back into the sluice. We both saw someone standing by the racks where we usually hang our clothes, but when we got around the corner and out from behind one of the shoe racks, there was no one there. We looked into the foreman's office that is attached to the stairwell, and he looked to the other sluice that is right beside the one we use, but no one was there. The weirdest part is we both saw two different ghosts. I saw a short and stubby one, while my friend saw a tall and lanky one. By far the weirdest experience I've had so far. My mom saw the White Lady in West Africa in the 80s. When I was in middle school, my mom was born in Continental Benin, a country situated in West Africa, which was colonized by the French and the Portuguese. Told me a story she never told anyone else. She was 12, so it was in the early 80s. It was very late at night, and she was sneaking up to her friend to go to her house. It was a full moon and the streets were flooded. My mom was walking an extremely dirty part of the city, which would have been the slums. No one else was outside at this moment. The streets were dead empty. Suddenly, she felt a strong and cold wind forcing past by. In her words. This is when she spotted something in the distance, thanks to the street lamps. A pale white lady dressed in a long white dress and a robe, reaching her ankles with a blue belt. I think, or perhaps a ribbon, around her waist. She was wearing a white veil, or something white, hiding her hair, according to my mom. Her brown hair was long and curly, and she was doing this creepy pose, her arms in front of her body with her hands joined together, and her lower arms raised a bit. And the most creepy part, she was smiling. According to my mom, the strong wind came from this lady who slowly was walking towards her. Obviously, as most would given the context, my mom was a little West African girl who never met a white person in her life. She straight up was horrified and felt chills, so she ran for her life to her friend's house. When she reached her friend's door, she turned. The lady wasn't there anymore. I always wondered and tried to come up with a logical explanation for this. First of all, I have a typical strict West African mom who isn't the kind to make up jokes and lies to scare her kids. She doesn't even believe in ghosts. Secondly, I have no explanation as to what white woman would be doing that part at night in this part of the city where my mom was born, especially dressed this way. My mom has been living in France half of her life now, and she's convinced, just like she was at the time, that she encountered the Virgin Mary. As a child, she came from the Muslim upbringing, and it's only when she came to France she got into the Catholic faith. Now she's in her 50s and still convinced that what she saw, and I believe what she saw, not her explanation for it though. Something wanted to hurt me while another entity warned my parents upstairs. So my whole life, I had minor experiences with the paranormal. Things like hearing someone say my name or footsteps when I'm alone in a house or at work. However, I've had two bigger experiences, and this is the scary one. When I, a 40-year-old female, was 20, my parents rented a house. They let me take over the basement. My parents' room, along with my sister's room and an office, were on the second floor with the living room. We had no issues when we first moved in, or for the first few months, which I truly believe was because my friend of mine was staying with me in the basement. After she was kicked out of her house, she stayed with us only till she was able to get her own place. However, as soon as she left, I began waking up at 2 a.m. every night and seeing a dark shadow across the room. At first, I thought maybe it was my eyes playing tricks on me, and just tried to ignore it. Around this time, though, I began to get a bad feeling down there, and started more time upstairs when just hanging out at home. I was working at a pub, and so I would often be at home during the day, alone with my parents. They were at work, and my sister was in school. It was at this time I started hearing footsteps walk up and down the hallway on the second floor, which I later found out my mom would hear if she was home alone as well. But whatever was upstairs felt peaceful. Now this is where it gets a little scary. I started to realize that the dark figure I would see at night was getting closer. I didn't notice right away because it would just stand there, but each night it was about one step closer than the night before. Now, looking back, I probably should have moved into the office upstairs when I got my bed, but I didn't. The last night I stayed in the basement, I woke up to this black shadow on top of me. I felt as though I could not breathe, and I started to panic, and at the same time, I couldn't move at all. It was terrifying. I felt like it lasted forever, and yet it was most likely only a few minutes. I took my blanket and pillow, ran up the stairs, and slept on the couch in the living room. The next morning, when my mother woke up and saw me sleeping on the couch, she asked me why. When I told her what happened, she looked pale, like all the blood drained from her face. Then she told me at the same time, she and my dad, who was very much a non-believer, had a very similar experience, only strangely not as scary, more like a warning. We only used the basement for storage after that. To this day, we think whatever was upstairs was trying to warn my parents of what was happening to me downstairs. Pennies landing on me. I'm pretty new to all this stuff. I've just had some spooky stuff happen in my flat lately. I live in Edinburgh in Scotland, and this flat is about 250 years old, which isn't unusual here. I don't know much about the history, except it was part of a larger tenement block, which was mostly destroyed during the Blitz. Anyway, I've lived in this flat for almost 2 years, with no problems. Then about a month ago, I got up to go to the toilet. When I was in the hallway, my bedroom door slammed shut behind me. I jumped but rationalized that it couldn't have been a draft. Then about 2 weeks ago, I was in the shower when a large round coin, landed on my shoulder and fell into the bath. The only thing above me was the shower head in the ceiling. Then, a few days ago, I was lying on top of my bed, on my back, texting, when a pound coin bounced off my chest. Again, the only thing above me is the ceiling. I phoned a psychic hotline on Google because I was spooked. She couldn't tell me anything about what it was, except to burn sage and open the windows, which I have done. However, last night a book from my bookshelf fell out of the shelf and onto the floor. It gave me such a scare. I'm not sure what to do now. I should say, I don't get a bad feeling, like I think whatever it is okay, but it's freaking me out because it's, well, the unknown, I guess. Do I ignore it? Is it trying to tell me something? What do I do? When I was about 5 or 6, my mother worked at a nursing home called the Bryant Center. I would often be picked up by her after school and taken to go sit in the employee break room until she got off her shift. It was in a corner of a basement. For reference, the building is built into the side of a hill. It had 2 or 3 stories, but by the time you got to the street, you could only see the 2nd or 3rd floor at ground level. My mom worked down there in the invalid ward, people who were permanently bedbound. And incidentally, the building used to be the county hospital, and the basement was originally the morgue. Now my mom saw a lot of strange shit while she was there, including a dark man wearing a hat that had a dog with red eyes, and a patient being thrown around by the unseen force despite being paralyzed by a stroke. While screaming about, she had made a deal with the devil, and he was there to take her soul. And the elevators randomly changing floors and opening, and the sound of footsteps coming down the hall, but no one was there. She also routinely heard babies crying and even saw a baby crawling down the hallway in the middle of the night shift. It disappeared into the old morgue. My story, however, is about me. Just across from the parking lot door and the corner where the break room was located was a security desk built into the opposite corner where the 2 halls met. The security guard was my buddy. He was a black guy who would listen to me prattle on and ask me about what I was watching in the break room TV. He would give me quarters for the vending machine to just go get snacks when I was hungry. My mom was pretty broke at the time, and school lunch had been a long time ago, and I had longer still till dinner at 7, so my security guard buddy was the shit. He went off on rounds every hour or so, and sometimes my mom would pop into the break room and ask if I was all right. She'd ask where I got the honey bun from, and I told her the security guard gave me a quarter. She'd give me a weird look, but I figured she was just having a stranger danger moment and being Gen X. Fast forward years later, my mom just had a knee replacement, and at the same time, I caught pertussis while pregnant, so we're both laying in bed, binging on Netflix, and I go to ask her, hey, what was that dude's name, the security guard, who used to buy me all those honey buns? Remember the skinny black dude? And my mom told me that not only did they not have a security guard at that time, but also at the time there were no black employees, and there were no female nurses. Only black employees were female nurses. Never been able to figure it out. I would say it's a false memory, but how did I get the money? Any ideas? All the doors swung open at 3 a.m. The night 2 loved ones committed suicide. Baby giggles at voice. This happened 9 years ago during my husband's deployment. We lived in military housing. It was just me and my 19-month-old son in the house. My aunt and I were very close. She died of ovarian cancer 2 months before my son was born. I stayed with her through hospice care. She tried really hard to stay alive until his birth. I'm glad she at least got to feel him kick and move around. That day was normal. I spent a couple hours chatting with a childhood friend. Went to bed like normal. I get woken up at 3 a.m. to every door on the second floor slamming open at once. The force they slammed open put the holes in the wall. I nearly pissed myself. I sit up and freeze, trying to process what just happened. Silence. Then I heard my aunt's voice, baby talking and cooing my son from his room. My son is responding to each time I hear her voice. He's squealing, giggling, baby belly laughing, and shaking the crib. So I hear her, baby responds, hear her, baby responds, and so on. This went on a couple minutes. I start bawling my eyes out because I've missed hearing her voice so much. I get up and start walking to my son's room. They're still continuing till I enter the room. Her voice stops. My son is all happy and riled up. I took him and we went to sleep downstairs. I was too freaked out to stay up there. I spent the rest of the deployment sleeping on the couch. The next day, my nerves were shot. I tried contacting my friend, but didn't hear from him. I tried contacting my uncle to see what he was doing. Didn't hear from him either. Called my cousin and found out my uncle killed himself because he didn't want to live without my aunt anymore. The childhood friend I was talking to committed suicide that night too. He was talking to all of his loved ones before he took his life. He didn't sound depressed or off. It was the usual banter about the outdoors and science fiction. He always was the strong, happy one in the group, still dealing with the survivor's guilt. I patched the holes in the wall. That never happened again with the doors. I don't drink or do drugs. I've been in therapy, and I have anxiety and depression, but nothing that causes delusions like that. I'm not into the New Age spiritual stuff, so this was very strange for me. Finishing the fast class for my MBA after that was really hard. That was the worst week of my life so far. I lost 2 loved ones in the same night from suicide. This experience was the weirdest paranormal encounter I've ever had. Immediate family sees Grandpa on separate occasions. Background. My grandfather died when I was 3, and my mom was his only birth daughter. My mom had my little brother when I was 9. and also met my stepdad around this time. Fast forward a bit, I'm around 10 or 11. My mom and I recently moved in with my dad, and my little brother was still sleeping in a crib. My room was at the end of the hallway, and my brother's room was right next to mine. It was nighttime. I was doing God knows what in my room, and my brother was asleep in his. For whatever reason, I left my room, probably to get a snack or something else superbly tempting. The hall light was on, and my brother's light was off, but his door was open. I walked right past, thinking nothing at first, but I saw something weird out of the corner of my eye. There was a rocking chair facing my brother's crib, a real chair, not a ghost chair. And I thought I'd seen the silhouette of a figure sitting, rocking, watching my little brother sleep. It was large, overweight looking, with a distinct flat top haircut, a very familiar silhouette. Of course, I did a double take and it was gone. I was both perplexed and intrigued. Abandoning my previous mission, I walked to the attached garage where my parents were hanging out. I opened the door and looked at my parents and said, "Hi, weirdest thing just happened. I think I saw Papa in the room in the rocking chair." Of course, I thought they would chuckle. That is really weird. And we'd laugh a bit, and then I'd go back to whatever 10-year-old me was doing, but they didn't laugh. Their eyes got wide and their mouths dropped open. They looked at each other, then back at me. I'm a little weirded out now. I'm like, what? They were silent for a minute. Then one of them asked, "Are you serious?" I confirmed and reiterated my story. My parents then proceeded to tell the both of them they had also seen my papa, each on separate occasions. My mom also saw him in the rocking chair watching my brother, and my dad saw him in the side of the garage door. Apparently, they had told each other about their own personal experiences beforehand and had laughed it off, like I had planned to do, until they heard mine. Now we're all convinced that we really do see my papa. I don't think this was mass psychosis sort of a situation, because we hadn't brought up my papa in conversation at all recently, which is why I thought it was weird and interesting that I'd see him in the first place. Conclusion. This is a true story. I'm not going to try to convince anyone otherwise. If you don't believe me, you don't, and that's fine. I've only told people in my inner circle, but I thought it's been 20 or so years since it happened. We have the internet now, so might as well share with the world. My coworker showed up one day as someone else. 4 years ago, I trained a new worker who was honestly a nice guy at the time, early 30s, seemingly healthy, very much into yoga, had a beautiful girlfriend, etc. He seemed very balanced and healthy. I'll name him Coworker A. We had another longtime coworker who was sort of a Mr. Popular with the managers, but honestly super annoying, really large personality. People mutually could only take him in small doses. He was essentially the embodiment of a TikTok frat boy who would randomly dance on the job and freestyle. Extremely annoying. Anyway, I'll name him Coworker B. Now, before I explain, I should include this workplace sucks. Barely holds a single star on Indeed. It's a large factory with no windows, toxic management, long hours. It's very hard on most people's mental health. So anyway, roughly a year in, Coworker A started changing. He and I were mutually friendly to one another, so we would have long, civilized discussions about interesting things. But something was really out of place when he mentioned his new beliefs about the world being flat and a hologram moon theory. It was really unlike the old version of him who was super rational. I sort of shrugged it off and said it was probably a phase or he's trolling. Fast forward a few weeks. Coworker A has seemingly took a lot of interest in Coworker B and sort of develops his mannerisms, but in a more endearing way. Kind of copying his silly dances and laughing. Seemed harmless, but as months go past, he continued to dance more and more, to the point we had to ask him to stop by supervisors. He would even be moving around the morning meetings, using all the same mannerisms and phrases as coworker B. This really started to creep out coworker B to the point he switched shifts. We theorized maybe he was on drugs, but coworker A was very vocal against all substance use, including alcohol and weed. He was also a vegan. Where things change for the worse is when coworker B ends up getting with the new hire at work. She ends up becoming his girlfriend. They move in together, etc. This is when coworker A shows up to work using coworker B's name, even signing himself in on the logbook as him, referring to himself as B all morning. Then later that day, A stands up on a work table screaming, "I'm in love with coworker B's girlfriend," by name, with his arms spread out across in a Jesus formation, face to the ceiling. The whole place was silent. And afterwards he ended up standing in a corner with a broom sweeping nothing for the next several hours. He wouldn't turn around from the corner either, not even when tapped on the shoulder, called by name. The only thing I saw him away from that corner was when it was time to go home. He was the last one out. Unfortunately, my job being QC, I'm always among the last ones to go out as well. Despite both of us being the last in the building, I did my best to act normal when passing him in the hallway. I glanced at him. He looked directly at me, head tilted down, making a pseudo-snarling dog face, eyebrows in a V, tongue and teeth out. The next day, our boss decided coworker A needed to go to the hospital, so we actually made an appointment and got him in with an Uber. He was put on leave for a week, the security guards who I was friends with told me. He was showing up in the middle of the night, trying to do signs for work in a card reader, sometimes at 2 and 3 a.m. Anyway, surprisingly, a week later, coworker A comes back and seems somewhat normal, almost like he has no recollection of anything he did. He even wrote an entire album on his phone at a time which surprisingly was better than I thought it would be. But I noticed it was all love lyrics, sort of wanky country love songs. As things seemed to normalize with coworker A, he started to really want to hang out with me and go for a hike and throw axes at trees. I sort of didn't agree or disagree and told him I'd get back to him on that, as I secretly was a little on edge. He asked me later that day if I was still down, and I said, unfortunately, I had other obligations. He said, "Well, I can't throw an axe at your face then." And I laughed, not knowing how to react at all. I told the manager about that, and he just kind of scratched his head uncomfortably and shrugged his shoulders. Anyway, coworker A ends up finding coworker B's address due to a work get-together where everyone was invited and someone leaked it to coworker A. They eventually find rocks and sticks in weird formations on the doorstep like shrines. They eventually find, and we all collectively knew it was A. Things got really weird when they actually found A looking through their window at night. He was also scratching the windows with his nails, calling out B's name, repeatedly whispering, "B, I need to tell you something." This is when our manager finally decided to take action and agreed to fire A. 4 years later, coworker A still stalks coworker B and their girlfriend, who has been getting a restraining order against him. He annually makes new Facebook accounts and adds all 200 plus workers who used to work there, as the place got shut down. He uses a new name each time with a different selfie. He sends a message to each one of us saying, "Hey you, it's B from work." So I guess my question is, what would this behavior be called? And how did such a normal, likable, level-headed person turn into this? Is there a term for this behavior? What would your diagnosis be? One of my friends had the balls to ask him in a reply, which I can share a screenshot of, if he recalls anything, which he doesn't seem to. But he sure remembers B's ex-girlfriend and says some extremely concerning things about how she's the only one and the only one. I'm the bigger one, she's the smaller one. He was put on this earth essentially to save her. He also seemingly has no support at all from family or anything that is working at a new job. Living alone, unattended. I feel like this is sort of a risk, no? Anyway, interested in some of your feedback and what we might be dealing with. My dead pet visited me from the afterlife. Death has always been a difficult topic for me to discuss with others, particularly when it consists of the ones I lost, coming back to pay me a visit. I got my first kitty cat on July 4th, 2004, for my then 9th birthday. I remember walking into the store looking at the individual cages stacked up on top of each other for adoption day. Star's cage was at the very top. As I peered into his box, this small black ball of fur with big neon green eyes stared back at me. Amongst his black fur was a white star in his belly. It's kind of like the Sneetches from Dr. Seuss. My heart melted in a matter of milliseconds. I begged my mom to adopt him, and she explained, "Cats are a huge responsibility, kiddo. Do you promise to love him unconditionally for the rest of your life? This includes when he no longer can take care of himself." I fiercely shook my head, telling her that I would love him until the day I die. Ever since that moment, Star became my best friend. He was the sweetest damn cat a little girl could ask for, and would literally do tricks, similar to a dog. He learned to come by his name, climb ladders, sit for chicken scraps, and roll over. Star also helped me get through a lot of dark times in my life, such as physical abuse from alcoholic parents, getting bullied at school, my mom's suicide, and having to move to another state with a different family. I loved every bit of my fur-covered companion. When I turned 17, his health drastically deteriorated. I told him, "Now, Star, you can't go just yet. You gotta stay a bit longer to see my first home. That's where you're gonna live out your final days, old boy." My SO and I saved up the money for this lovely rental home that was everything we ever wanted. Star managed to kick it for another 4 months before we set off his course for that inevitable bridge to the other side. What was nice is that our small town vet performed Star's euthanasia in his favorite spot on the couch in our home. The month following was really hard on me. I was heavily distraught. Every night I would hear his bell on his collar and his purr echo into my ear. I'd feel his heavy warmth press down next to my side of my bed when I laid down. I would have vivid dreams of him beckoning me to the hallway with his meows. While I was awake, I would see quick glimpses of black flash down our hallway. Once, when I was crying in the living room, his picture flew at me from the bookshelf. I told my significant other, but they thought I was losing it. A month exactly after Star died, my significant and other were arguing about something incredibly asinine. During the time, we had issues that we just couldn't get past. I was in the bedroom when my significant other stormed off in the main room before quickly coming back. They looked pale as a ghost and stated through trembling teeth, "Honey, there's something you need to, see." I followed them into the front room and watched as their shaking pointer finger pointed at Star's final resting place, on her couch. You could see indented paw prints that led to the exact area Star had died in. My heart pounded. I grabbed Star's painted paw print keepsake off the shelf and compared it to the prints on the cushion. I couldn't believe it. It was the exact match. We didn't have any other animals beside a huge dog who had been sleeping in the back bedroom. We looked at each in disbelief, and my significant other told me that they believed me, every last word, and that they were sorry. We worked past our problem. I think it was honestly Star's last gift to me from the spirit realm. Ever since that day, I've not felt Star. I don't hear him or see him anymore. The dreams I have of him concluded. Every fiber of him is left, and only my memories remain. It's been 2 years now, and we're going through the process of buying our rental property. I'd like to tell myself that he really did stick around to see my first home.